how important it is to address beliefs and not just superficial things in sales calls?
You can get from 0 to 100K without really vision, any real mission, any core values. But at a certain point, what you're going to run into is actually realizing that you cannot do everything in the business, and you need to then build self-empowered leaders. What can I do to actually close the deal? Is it a follow-up? Is it a reoffer? Is it looping them in with a referral? Like, just get the deal across the finish line. And that's my mindset. You will literally impact their state by how you show up. So if that's how you showed up on the sales huddle, we got to nip that in the bud, man, and we got to get going. So one of the best questions to ask on a sales call, right? If I could go back and look at all my sales calls and be like, okay, this one question, right? Do you want to let down that version of you? Or do you actually want to let that version of you's future? You know what? Yes, I'm empowered. I want to do this. I'm not going to let myself down.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Today, I'm super happy because we have a chance to be with Eli, who is co-founder at B2B Scale. He is chief sales officer over there, and he is one of the best salespeople I personally know. So super happy to have you on the show, Eli.
I appreciate you for having me, man. I'm super stoked to be here.
Yeah. So tell us maybe a little bit more about the background, especially your story in sales and how you got into sales in the first place.
Yeah, great question. So I first got into sales when I was about 17 or 18.
Yeah.
I think and I'm 24 now. I've been in the game for about 6 years. My first real exposure to sales, ironically, came from selling used cars.
Yeah.
I was 18, hustling the lots, just trying to really make as much as I could, just learn as much as possible. And after that, I ended up starting my own marketing agency, had that for a couple years, and then kind of bounced around, sold for a couple different coaching programs, and then just past June got back into the entrepreneur game, and I've been helping my business partner Christian scale the company we have now. So I think in short, I'd say initially got into it in car sales, but since then I've been exposed to a multitude of different industries and different sales frameworks, mentors, and people along the way. And man, hopefully we can cover some amazing bombs on this podcast. And dude, stoked to talk about the journey a little bit.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about you is really the way you sell. I haven't seen anyone sell specifically like you. Everyone has their own style. Your style is really calm, collected. I personally qualify it as almost hypnotic, the way you sell. You have that kind of suave way of communicating a point, helping people think, ask good questions. Yeah. It's less of a arm twisting sale like some maybe car salesmen do.
The good old days. Yeah,
it's more of I really like the way you sell. So could you tell us a little bit more about the actual frameworks you've developed and kind of what you're using right now to sell?
Yeah, and I appreciate that advice. Sorry, I appreciate that feedback, man. I've taken a lot of note from sort of the old school methodology. I've also taken notes on some of the new generation of people, you have Jeremy Miner, Matt Ryder, these guys, the NEPQ gang. And then you got people that are more on the Alex Hormozi side, the closer framework, his whole thing. And then obviously the OGs like Jordan Belfort, Grant Cardone, whatever, right? I think if I could boil it down into one main sales philosophy, I actually have coined my own framework, which is the sale through sales philosophy. So a lot of people, they're pushing their way, trying to get those questions answered, and they're kind of in a combative state, or they're kind of carrying a lot of that emotion during the call rather than letting the prospect carry a lot of it. Like you said, hypnotic. I like to describe it more as therapeutic for people to hear themselves describe to themselves what they need to hear, right? To ultimately move forward. And I have this mindset of hey, you cannot have a sale if you don't have an empowered buyer. And so for me, I've also mixed in other high performance training, high performance coaching, and just kind of turned it into a sales through sales philosophy that, just kind of eases you through the sales process and just in general, your entire sales process for your business, right? And yeah, I think my main value proposition that I like to emphasize is, you cannot convince, I'm of the belief that you can't convince someone to do anything, right? You can only ask a series of very well and consistent and concisely designed questions to lead them to the answers they need to hear eventually. So
yeah, that's amazing. And now you have a team of closers too, so you're training them and everything. So question for you, if you were to teach your younger self, 18-year-old Eli, what you know now about sales in a short period of time, like what would you really focus on? What would you say is most important? And what kind of tips would you share with?
Man, great question. I got the chills because I'm like, man, 18-year-old Eli, like he would have loved hearing this stuff. That's just like the inner child in me. But for a lot of people, especially if they're just starting out, they feel like they need to go 0 to 100 and just be like goated overnight, right? That is good. It's a good mindset to have. It's part of that hustle that hey, like you need more and you want more, but you need to actually take the time. And I know it's probably super cheesy, but you need to take the time to go through the reps, right? And there's a quote that's like pretty direct, which is like time takes time. Like you cannot speed that process up. And in the shorter amount of time you can get as many reps as possible, the shorter you'll be able to kind of cut that learning curve down. But the way I see it is like you got to fail fast, fail forward, right? Make aggressive mistakes on your calls so that you can then, I call it Joe Maddening yourself, which is like optimizing your feedback loop to understand, okay, we've now reflected on our calls, our in-person sales, our appointment sets, our deals closed, and we've looked for the commonalities of what leads us to a win and what leads us to great answers. And now we can just keep those variables consistent moving forward with every other call that we go into. And then the things that aren't working, as you optimize the feedback loop, you can then remove certain things and then really start to just make a very data-driven approach to your process to just stay in front of the market in the best way possible, to always be learning, to be a student of the game, to never let your ego get in the door, and then really just absorb as much information as possible while getting reps and holding yourself to a high standard with practice, repetition, role plays, and call reviews, minimum 30 minutes a day of training, if not an hour. And yeah, you do that over a long enough time, along with the sales calls. That's what I would tell myself, to kind of make me feel like it's a bit more in my control, and that feeling of, being empowered that I can go and grab it, right? Because it's not just this woo-woo thing of, hey, I can get good at sales if I just keep trying. It's like, no, you can just focus on the inputs and the action-based goals, the habit-based goals, less of like sometimes disempowering other goals that you set for yourself that are like, well, I just want to get to XYZ income goal, but you haven't actually tied that into what the day-to-day looks like. So yeah, I think that I was very confused when I was 18 in the sales regard, right? Not in any other regard, but I was genuinely like told all these different things by different people, and I had no clear path, no clear system, no clear regimen. And I think that caused me to not learn as quick as I could. And yeah, other factors played a part, but if I could go back, I'd say those things myself at 18.
So can you tell us a little bit more about, you've been influenced by Jeremy Minor, Grant Cardone, all these people. Who is one of your favorite recently, and what have you really learned as lessons from that person?
So one of my favorite sales trainers is actually someone that not a lot of people know about. He's a good friend of mine and has been in the game for years, like 10, 15 plus years, right? And his name is Anas Dawood, right? If you look him up, he has a sales style called the NBC method. So the never be closing. It's kind of like a take at the always be closing, like old school hard style, force them to buy kind of thing. And one of the biggest things that I think a lot of people struggle with in sales is getting their head out of like the sales call and really coming from how can I be an authority consultant? More importantly, almost like a coach to this person. Because a lot of the times your prospects are holding on to certain beliefs. They're holding on to certain challenges and they're bubbling up on the sales call, but people don't really address them. And that causes them to kind of get those weird, like gut feelings at the end of the call where the prospect's like, you know what? I mean, although you did everything great, I just don't want to move forward. And a lot of that comes from you not being able to identify what those beliefs are. And more importantly, knowing how to help them overcome them, to empower them to want to buy. And so the NBC method, Anas Dawood, I seriously recommend him. Amazing guy, amazing human being. He takes a lot of the things that he learned in door to door, and also his own sales coaching online and running different businesses and doing over like $1 million in commissions, I think. I mean, at this point, if not more. And yeah, just like making it distilled into a very, very like just easy to follow process. Yeah.
And talking about beliefs, because you're someone who I really admire for your sales framework, because you go deep into the identity beliefs and all that kind of stuff. Can you tell us a little bit more about how important it is to address beliefs and not just superficial things in sales calls?
Yeah. So superficial things in sales calls, I mean, can we define that? Like, where would you say that shows up?
So maybe like benefits, features, all that kind of stuff versus going deep.
Perfect. Yeah. So a lot of for me at least, right? If I'm looking at how to uncover an actual belief on a sales call, it's less about focusing on the product. It's less about focusing on the pitch and focusing on the features, right? And it's more about asking a strategic set of questions that allow them to open up, so that while you're going through questions, and this is something I tell all of our sales guys, it's like, if I ask you a question, your brain is going to answer the question, right? If I say, so what's the money going to do for you more personally, Rob? You're going to tell me. Like, you're not going to just avoid the question, right? And I think a lot of the times you need to have the right questions in place, but also know what answers you're looking for. And so the beauty of, let's say, keeping your questions consistent is being able to actually identify certain patterns from the outcomes of the questions that you're getting. Because if I were to tell you, hey, Rob, what is that going to do for you more personally? There's only so many answers you could give me, right? But if I never keep my questions the same, and maybe one guy I ask that question, then the next guy asks another question, it's going to be harder for me to start tracking those outcomes and knowing what answers I'm really looking for. And so I think, to answer your question, although it's important to, yes, still focus on the features, you still have to tie the sale in a logical way. A lot of it, and I'd say almost 80% of it, is an emotional sale. And if you have a client that, let's say, is on the phone with you and they're talking about how they've been burned in the past and they don't know if anything's going to work for them in the future, that is a belief, right? And I'm a big proponent of, you get to keep the limitations that you fight for, right? And so a lot of people need to kind of you got to shift their paradigm a little bit. You got to shake them up. If not, then they're going to keep making decisions based off of that current paradigm and that decision-making process with those beliefs they're holding on to. And if you believe it, guess what? It's going to come true. And next thing you know, they're still going to get bad results, right? And so you sometimes have to just unpack it through certain questions. We could totally dive into those later, but that's my thought process with really how to get those unpacked. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And now I've also seen you train your team in sales, and that's kind of what you're covering as well. You're covering a lot of their own identity, right? You're doing a lot of that, which I admire, is like leadership work, transforming their identity, but then coaching them on how to address the beliefs. And so tell us a little bit more about, when it comes to training a team, finding the right players in sales, and how you act as a leader when it comes to changing their beliefs and coach them at how they change the audience's belief after that.
Yeah. Super jam-packed question. So the top key traits that I look for in any good sales rep is going to be adaptability, right?
Yeah.
So can they move quick? Can they adjust to certain changes, right? If a lot of us are in the startup world of agencies doing 100K, 200K, 500K a month, we're startups, you need to be adaptable. You need to have someone that's ready to adjust to changes as they go along. The next character trait I look for is coachability, right? So if, let's say, I'm on a role play with them during the interview process and I ask them, hey, that was a great mock call. Are you cool if I give you some coaching? And they immediately say yes. But then as I'm coaching them, they don't take any notes. They are kind of glassy eyed and they're just staring at you into the abyss on Zoom. It's that tells you immediately how they're going to show up for you during your day to day, especially when you're working with them. And that tells me that they're not coachable, right? Because they're not actually trying to take the feedback. A players, like rock star salespeople, will be taking every note vigorously and then repeat it back to you to make sure they understand it, and then apply it perfectly with, just amazing execution after you've given them the advice. That's what top level salespeople do. So if you want to find them, then you got to ask a series of questions, but coachability is the second thing. And third thing is curiosity, right? So I have an exercise that I tell my guys, right? Which is okay, if you were to be at a networking event with a billionaire, let's say are there trillionaires out there? Maybe not, maybe probably, in Saudi Arabia, right? Let's say you're at a networking event with a billionaire and the quality of the conversation, right, was determined on how long you could keep him around you without him moving on to the next table, right? Ask yourself the question, how long through your curiosity and the questions you're asking them could you keep him engaged? And if the answer is 5 seconds, well, guess what? You're going to need to work on how curious you are, right? How compassionate you are during your sales calls, because really good salespeople ask just really good questions, but they're genuinely curious. I know Hormozy has talked about it. I coined it a lot as well. It's you have childlike curiosity, right? When you look at a kid and he's looking up at his dad, he's why are people so big? It's that genuine curiosity. You want to be able to almost think about that when you're on a call, and you need that in good sales reps. And I'd say the fourth thing is, and probably the most important, is going to be prior success, right? So like, do they have existing experience? Have they done well in another offer? Have they done well in a business, right? Even like personal things too, right? Like the chief sales or chief revenue officer at HubSpot describes prior success as like just personal lifestyle achievements that they've been able to accomplish. He said that a lot of the top sales guys like were actually like ex-US Olympians, or like they played in the orchestra in their home city, and so like if you ask questions around people and the professional achievements, the prior success in their lives that they've had, it'll usually give you a really good determining factor for how well they'll take their job and their responsibilities, because those people have an innate drive to want more. And you can't necessarily coach that a lot of times. So you kind of have to have the batteries pre-built in. And so, yeah, those are the 4 traits: adaptability, coachability, curiosity, and prior success.
And tell us a little bit more about how you coach your team, because I've seen it, I admire it, your style. What's your real focus when you're leading, you're acting as a leader for your sales team?
Yeah.
What's your real focus?
So the real focus, we do a sales huddle every single morning, right? We like to track our sleep. So I got an Oura Ring right now, and I like to know what my sales guy's sleep routine is. And I also like to just have a really, really good mindset towards, like, if you're asking me, okay, how do you structure the best sales meeting possible, right? It's like, I want to have the best sales meeting every single day. And what that turns into is like bringing the right energy, getting the team fired up, because sales guys, like, they're getting told no on the phones all day. They need energy instilled in them, right? So that they can get that conviction built up into them. And you can almost think about it as like an energy shift towards the end of the call. Like, there's no real, like, you're not going to empower like a maybe an HR person, but like an accountant, right? Like, their job is doing pretty basic stuff behind a computer. They're not going to get like all fired up and start jumping up and down, right? But a sales guy needs that. And for me, a lot of it turns into, okay, what energy do we show up with on the call? Okay, what wins do we have? And the next thing I like to cover on the call is like, okay, what can we do to get one step closer to closing a deal, right? What's the plan of action on this guy? Look at the calendar for the past few weeks. Look at the last day's worth of calendar calls. Like, how can we actually work a deal? The biggest question I think a lot of people don't ask themselves is, they're always asking about like the questions they can ask on sales calls, but they don't ask themselves the question of, what can I do to actually close the deal, right? Is it a follow-up? Is it a reoffer? Is it looping them in with a referral? Like, just get the deal across the finish line. And that's my mindset. And I think that came from the car dealership, because every morning we'd look at the list of leads, and I'd have to, stand up and raise my hand and be like, hey, like, here we are with this one and this one and this one. And, I think that mindset just helps my team a lot, because a lot of people are kind of given a lot of inbound leads, a lot of inbound appointments, but they don't take them as seriously. And so I never want them to take the fact that they have inbound appointments lightly. And so a lot of it is just, again, going through those frameworks, those trainings. We'll usually do a role play, a call review. And then if it's really something that I'm like, I got to show them, then I'll show them one of my sales calls and how I actually closed a deal, right, for them. Because that gives them this mindset of like, wow, like, I can't believe I'm actually seeing it in action, because I'm not on the sales calls anymore. And I've done sales for my whole life. So it's like, I'm not afraid to take a sales call. But sometimes they kind of need to see that boost in like, oh, wow, like, this is Eli going through the call. Like, I didn't know I could say it in this tonality, or like, that's a great question you could ask there, And so just going through those recordings to just get them empowered to also ask the best questions on their calls. And so a lot of it is, I'd say, to sum it up into one word, empowering the team in the morning. Yeah.
Very nice. And I know you get them hyped. I hear you.
We get them hyped. Yeah.
And it's so important in sales and performance environments.
Yeah.
Especially on the front end, acquisition, sales, all of that stuff. A lot of energy needs to go into it.
Yeah.
And you're doing a great job at that.
Yeah. Like earlier today, my sales guy, he joined in, and he's kind of getting down on himself because he's not really following his routines as well as he could. And immediately I was like, hey, real quick, right? Catch ourselves for a second. There's something that happens, right, over time, where during your day, you might have these ups and downs emotionally, right? And you might be able to like have this emotional peak. And then all of a sudden you start to just like negatively stack certain thoughts. But one thing you need to be cognizant of is your catch rate. So how quick you can catch yourself before you go into a negative thought loop, and really catch yourself so that you go back into that positive energy, that like, okay, that empowerment energy, that I am built for this energy, right? And so I tried to basically bring that on the call this morning, because, this is an example of kind of like how each sales huddle is different every morning. It's like he needed to just reset, right? He didn't need to focus on tomorrow's routines and him being down on himself for, like not following the day prior routine. He didn't need to have me go through a call review. He didn't need me He didn't need for us to go through and like work the deals. It was like, dude, the way you're showing up is a little bit down right now. And you have 6 calls on the calendar today. So we can either be Debbie Downers and think about how we're all victims in this whole game, or we could stand up. We could do some deep breathing, right? We could do some body taps. We could jump up and down. We can move our shoulders. We can play some hype music. And I like to always close my eyes right as I'm about to like finish up that whole routine. And I'll get him to start thinking about like him about to walk out to like a UFC arena and the whole crowd chanting his name. And that's that kind of like priming that a lot of these amazing people do in the world, like Tony Robbins, right? Eli Wild. I mean, like all the people that speak on stage, right? And it's like, for me, I need to sometimes coach them on how to get themselves through the negative self-talk and kind of the disempowered energy. And, you know, part of that is just making sure that they can show up and just serve on the calls. Because if you're a negative Nancy on the calls, nothing against our Nancys out there, then they're going to feel that through the phone, through the Zoom. Like they will see your energy and you will literally impact their state by how you show up. And so if that's how he's showing up on the sales huddle, we got to nip that in the bud, man. And we got to get going. So I was literally jumping up and down at the WeWork earlier, and he was jumping up and down too. And I'm like, hey, I know those girls are looking at you like all weird. Just feel into it, you know, push through it. So yeah, just different things like that. Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah. The empowerment routine is really solid and important. Talking about that, and especially the beliefs and all that, I want to go deeper into especially the questions that you ask, because what I've really admired from you is the quality of the questions you know how to ask. So could you share maybe a few powerful questions, either in sales or that really help transform beliefs?
So one of the best questions to ask on a sales call, right? If I could go back and look at all my sales calls and be like, okay, this one question, right, always has a positive impact on the sales call. It is what I like to call a double-minded question that brings the prospect back to the moment where they realize that they needed to get help. So I'm gonna give you an example. Let's say we're talking on the phone and I might say, Rob, you know, do you mind if I just ask you a personal question?
Yeah.
Cool. Because it sounds like you put a lot of thought into this, you know. I'm just kind of curious, like, was there, I guess, like a stack or like a series of events that kind of led you to realize, like, hey, you know what, like I might need some outside help with video production and content? Or was it just like one single moment that kind of sparked you to want to, you know, put your foot in the sand, draw the line and say, you know what, enough's enough. Like, I'm not pushing forward until I figure this out. Like, what kind of sparked that? And then what's going to happen is the prospect does 2 things. Number one, what I mean by double-minded question is that it's the same question, just asked different ways. And reliving the moment where the prospect realized they need to make a decision is so crucial. You're basically time traveling back in time to that moment where they saw the ad. They had that instance where they had their head in their hands and they were like, I need to figure this out, right? They had a friend talking about how they were closing deals and now they feel bad about themselves emotionally, and, you know, like something triggered it. And a lot of the times when you get them to relive that, because we all have those thoughts. Like, I know when I'm about to go buy something, it's because something triggered it. Like, I'm not going to go to the store to buy an electrolyte if I didn't realize earlier that I was dehydrated. And so I'm like trying to pull back that innate psychological, I guess, reaction that we all have, that initial thought of us wanting help. I'm trying to reopen that on the sales call, because then it comes full loop. Right. And a lot of people, if they don't ask it, well, then they're not putting themselves in the best position possible to close. So I'd say that's one of my favorite questions to ask on sales calls. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And really going to those root moments, those deeper things, not covering all the benefits. Because especially when you're starting out in sales, usually it's like, okay, here's the product, here's the benefits. But going back to those root issues, that psychology. Do you have any other really powerful questions, whether it's leadership or sales, that you like to use on a recurring basis?
One of the best questions that I like to ask, and you can use this in leadership or in sales, right, is let's say the prospect is holding on to a belief, right? And that belief is showing up. Like I had an example where I had a prospect the other day tell my closer, and I was on the call too, coaching him through it, like they felt like they just couldn't let go of control on like the outreach. So, you know, we do outreach for different marketing agencies, and, you know, basically we were done for you service. And he felt like, he described it as like going on vacation and not knowing if the housekeeper is going to take care of the house and like walk the dogs the right way and like clean the thing. And so he was dealing with this belief. And so one of the questions that always gets you to kind of get the prospect to uncover their own sort of hurdles is by basically asking them, hey, like, why did you start this business in the first place? Like, get the overarching goal, right? And then kind of tying back to the other question I asked earlier, which is like, okay, and like, I guess I'm sure when you were like a couple of years ago, like you had a moment where you decided you want to start this business, right? And I get them to kind of relive that moment. Like, walk me through the day that you decided to start your marketing agency, or walk me through the day you decided to start your business. It's like everyone can tell you that answer because you remember it, right? Probably when you got into the online space or whatever business. I know I remember mine vividly. Like, if someone asks me, I'm like, yeah, like I was in my room, I saw this video, I jumped up and down, and I was like, I'm going to conquer the world, right? And what I'm trying to do is get the prospect to think about, again, their current goal now, where they were when they first started the business, and then basically giving them like the freedom and the space in a simple question, which is, can I ask, like, let's say, I don't know, 22-year-old version of you, the one that was in that basement, empowered, right, when he was about to start his business. Let's say he were to call you right now, struggling with letting go of some of that control, right? Letting go of maybe not knowing if the business he's going to offer that outreach to is going to actually like deliver as good as they can. How would you advise that 22-year-old version of you on how to kind of overcome that? And what happens is people start to obviously give that version of themselves advice, which is by definition, them giving themselves advice on what they need to hear, right? And the very last and most powerful question within that loop is to basically ask, hey man, like, do you want to let down that version of you? Or do you actually want to let that version of you's future, right, come to fruition? Because you're the choice to decide right now. And deep down in your heart of hearts, I know that you want more, right? And I might be totally off here, but somewhere along the way, you just might have lost a little touch of that belief that you really could do this. But I'm here to tell you, man, I'm here for you. I see that belief in you. You are built for this. You are built for more. And are you going to actually go out and take it? Or are you going to sit here and let the, current version of yourself that's kind of getting in the way right now whisper in your ear, right? Because think about the energy shift in that conversation to get them to be like, you know what? Yes, I'm empowered. I want to do this. I'm not going to let myself down. Versus forcing them to kind of like, hey man, why do you have that belief and why are you holding on to this? Like all these what, why, how based questions versus strategically planned questions to get them to overcome the hurdle themselves.
What do you think influences people the most?
I believe the biggest thing that influences people the most is status, right? How they feel like other people perceive them. And also like the feeling that they are enough, right? For themselves and like what their actual worth is, not their self-confidence. So what I mean by that is if, let's say, for example, you're not going to rise to the level of which you feel like you're confident of, you're always going to fall to what you feel like you're worthy of. And so sometimes the biggest level of influence on people is some of those deep, dark traumas, insecurities, doubts, thoughts, feelings of not being good enough, basically understanding what they are for themselves so that they can be their own coach, right? And reflect and redefine and actually reinstill like encouragement within themselves to push through, right, the noise, to push through those negative scenarios, to push through the doubts, the rejection. And so that's ultimately the biggest level of influence because no one knows those pains besides that person. And if you can uncover those pains and not in any way use it for negative or out of malice on them, but to actually empower them to pull what is theirs, then I mean, that is a high level of influence just showing up. And you see it from all the great leaders, even people that like Alex Hormozy, he talks about some of the superiority complex or the inferior like thought process of like, I don't know if I'm good enough, right? It's like that actually drives people a lot, and knowing how to understand that from a person, give grace and not judge, right? And then get them to feel empowered to want to actually go and actually uncover it, unpack it, and move through the world from, because of a better place from it, then that's you influencing almost at the very highest level that you could.
Wow.
Yeah.
Could you give us some example of questions related to status that can influence, their decision based on status or self-worth? Anything that comes?
Great question. One of the questions that can get people to kind of understand and move past their own self-worth is thinking about a time where, and we've all had this, right? Where maybe something didn't go their way and they felt some type of rejection, right? So it could be them going and talking to a girl and getting rejected, a client rejecting them, a client charging back and like trying to ask for a refund. Like that's real rejection. People can feel into that emotion. And that initial reaction that you have, that's just the start of how deep you can really go with uncovering someone's self-worth. Because if I get someone on the phone, for example, that always dealt with rejection growing up and maybe not feeling they're good enough, whatever, if they get rejected in real life, part of that conditioning and their self-talk that's led them to where they are now will reflect in how they deal with their rejection. They might be a bit more emotional about it. They might feel bad about themselves afterwards. They might get in their own way, start to have negative thoughts, and then those negative thoughts start stacking, right? And so to answer your question, the number one kind of, I guess, question you could ask, or series of questions you could ask someone to kind of deep down find out, hey, like, how do they treat their own self-talk and inner work with themselves, is first you can set a frame, which is like, hey man, like we don't, the amount of like light we emit to the world doesn't come from how positive we are, rather than the amount of darkness we can accept. And so a lot of people don't know that. And once you go and actually ask, hey, like that rejection, right? That feeling you felt, right? Like really feeling into it. Where else does that show up in your life? Or where else do you feel like that reaction that you had initially kind of comes from, right? It could be previous trauma. It could be, something else. And a lot of the times people have these negative thoughts around how they feel personally around rejection. And then you almost have to just help them redefine it. And let's say rejection in this case is a prospect not working with you because you just didn't get the best results. Well, a great way to redefine that is like, you know what? Maybe that person didn't move forward with you because God was hiding your value from them and they're not aligned with your vision. You feel good after hearing that. You're like, oh, great. Yeah, reject me all you want, right? And then, obviously like the other one, which is what if all the no's, right, that I'm getting, what if all the rejections I'm getting are just helping me build the muscles so that I can carry the weight of my success, right? And so a lot of people will kind of get stuck in the negative sort of, rejection loop, when in reality, it's actually a beautiful thing to get rejected. And you want to reshift that energy so that the moment it comes up again on a call, a prospect, whatever, you actually feel good when you hear the rejection.
Did you always feel like that? I know, like starting out, my own sales experience, like, can you tell us some stories about being rejected, working through that?
Oh my gosh. So much, man. So much rejection. One of the funniest rejections that I had ever gotten in my whole life was back when before I sold used cars, which is the precursor for selling cars, was selling ad space in a magazine company. And this was like, Facebook ads was already a thing. So like, I wasn't going to convince, like, that's a limiting belief, but I probably was going to need a lot of work on my own sales game to get someone to buy ad space, right? Or like the network and the connections. And I was 17, didn't have a car. Like, I didn't know how to sell. And I remember one day I was just so motivated. I was like, all right, I cold called this practice, this optometry, right? I got the practice manager on the phone and I was like, hey, I want to set up a meeting. Like, we are this magazine company. Like, let me come in. And I felt so confident. My dad, he pulls up, he drops me off. I'm going in with my suit. I get in there and they're like, yeah, no, the practice manager will be with you in a second. I'm like, yeah, I'm about to make some money here. Cause like, dude, one commission would be like, I don't know, $1,000, right? Like, it was good money for a 17-year-old. So I was motivated by the money. And I go to the back, he sits me down and he's like, all right, what you got? I start rambling about what we do. And at the end, he's like, cool. I'll let the owner of the practice know and we'll get back to you. And I was just like, no. I was like, in the moment, I was like, oh yeah, of course. Like the owner, obviously. And in that moment, I remember walking outside and just going back in the car and my dad asking me, so like, how'd it go? And I was just like, man, couldn't get him, but we'll get the next one. And just knowing that I'd put all this effort into cold calling all these people and finally getting a micro yes, and then just to get told no to put on and have my dad waste his time. It's just like that rejection really sat with me. And then from that day on moving forward, I was like, all right, always ask for the owner. Don't ask for the practice manager. Like, do not ask for them. No.
It's building your muscles.
Building the muscles for the way to your success. Amen. Yeah.
And tell us maybe about a really great sale that you've had.
A great sale that I've had. Let me think about this for a second. One of the greatest, most fun sales that I had actually happened about a week ago. And it's probably, I've done so many sales to the point where like I can remember back to one specifically, but this one in particular just made me feel so heartwarmed, right? Because I just met up at another event with an agency owner, and he ended up coming to dinner in Medellin, Colombia, with a couple other agency owners that are all doing 150K, 200K a month, and they're great guys. And I'd never met these guys besides the one friend that came to dinner. We had food, we had steaks, and by the end of the dinner, they were just like, hey, take the credit card. Like, dude, like, how do I like just plug it in? Like, let's get it started, for the service we were doing. And it was one of those sales calls, sales processes that I always love, because you don't feel like you're selling. You just feel like you're building an amazing relationship with someone, because you know your value, you know what you can do for them, and you're just speaking truth. And that is the number one self-worth, but also just like the biggest homing beacon for other people to want to actually want to work with you. You're not lying, you're not BSing, you don't come across in your psyche or your persona like you're just this flaky person. Like, you genuinely know your worth. Sure, there were some questions that I asked, but I mean, just by the way I was answering, by the end of it, they were good to go. Made a couple, more than a couple grand at that dinner. So yeah, that was a really, really fun sale. And now, they're going to be great friends, great clients, and we're going to crush for them. And then the cycle is going to repeat. Maybe they'll refer someone else, and we'll do the same dinner, and that'll happen again. And I just love knowing that it came from a place of love. While we had dinner, like, I just love that. So
yeah, and that's such a high level of selling. Like, I've been on, in multi-$100,000 deals, and it's funny how those deals happen more casually almost than the like lower ticket ones or all. Yeah. It's like you perform at your best when you're more casual, when you've got sales experience and all of that stuff, and you can line up great deals. So
yeah, man, yeah.
It's funny when you're starting out as a sales rep. It's like you think it's all about maybe the suit, and it's all about these special things like the suit, the script, and all of that. But in the end, it's really about that connection, that belief in yourself that you can deliver for them. The transference of that belief. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about like your recruiting process with newbie sales reps and how that currently works, and who you're looking to onboard on your team as a sales leader now.
Yeah, and so right now the number, I guess, to answer your question, so where do we recruit? How do we find talent? Like, what's the process there? And then also, who am I looking for right now specifically in that regard? I'm a big believer of the mindset that you always have to be prospecting for a player talent, right? Like, always be prospecting for them. You never know when you're going to need to pull someone off your roster and have someone on the bench just ready to go. A lot of people struggle with building that bench, and then when they need to pull in someone, they can't actually scale at the speed at which they like, because they're handicapped, because they never prevented the hire they never prevented the problem in the first place. And so for me, I right now have different LinkedIn ads running right now. My sales team's already pretty good, and I have a pretty good network. So luckily I can always call on that and have a couple people that have been, working over time. But believe it or not, my most hidden process, and hopefully it's okay that I'm saying this, is actually giving coaching, right? So I give coaching to certain people that hit me up in the space sometimes. And if they're a sales rep, within the coaching, right, I'll drive value, I'll come from a place of service, right? But somewhere during the call, if they have uncertainty around their ability to grow their income goals at that business, I will reinforce that belief, and I will let them know that that's not okay, and that they should be earning what they need, and that what they're worth. And usually what I find is that a couple of things happen. Either number one, you just plant the seed, and then in the future it grows, and then they hit you up and they're ready to go after they've seen your posts about all of whatever. Or they actually just jump right on board, and they're like, yeah, right? Like, you're right. Like, how can I get started? And so that's like a hidden recruiting process of like just finding people that haven't yet actually actualized their potential and know what their potential is, but you see it in them. And when you see it in them, you have a choice to be able to go, okay, I could keep the door open in the future and they'll eventually come through, or I could be assertive, ask for the sale, and basically get them to want to commit to our business. And so that's kind of the process that I like to take. And, that's for sales reps, just because I know the game really well, and very grateful for the network that I've built. As far as like what I actually look for and when I'm looking for someone, like when it comes to my sales team, definitely more appointment setters, can never use enough of them. We have a great culture where we, again, sales meetings, different training, like tons of value always going out, and obviously good commissions. And yeah, even like an actual sales, like an actual closer, right? Looking to prospect for one soon. Already have a few that I've like worked with, and so yeah, I mean, the biggest thing right now is just how can I just have just dogs, savages, people that are just ready to take a good amount of calls, 6 to 8 calls a day, and get their calendar maxed out and just make good money along the way, and have fun doing so.
Yeah, and you guys are scaling fast. So maybe just to wrap this up and go towards a wrap up of the episode, what's the best piece of advice you could give to business owners, co-founders who are looking to scale that you might have given yourself in the past?
Yeah, so the biggest piece of advice that I can give any business owner right now, and by all means, like I'm still working on my journey, like we're on a 7-figure run rate, which is great, but we still have a lot of progress to go. You can get from 0 to 100K without really any vision, any real mission, any core values. Like you can get there by just kind of pushing through, breaking, the walls down and just being super aggressive with sales and marketing. But at a certain point, what you're going to run into is actually realizing that you cannot do everything in the business, and you need to then build self-empowered leaders to then also have people that they empower. So it's like you have to realize that those amazing team members, the ones that are going to empower others, the ones that are going to have your back when times are rough, they are going to be very, very high level people that are top talent, like A players. And those people will only get on a ship if the North Star that they're rowing towards is worth chasing. And if they do not have any clear vision, if there's no real vision, mission, company value, to like actual impact project that the company is working on, then it's hard to get people bought into that boat. And yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is just, again, just making sure you have really clear, defined goals for your company, but not just about money, but about, what your vision is of your company. And I know it sounds like cheesy and it might sound kind of crazy, but like all the high level entrepreneurs that I talk to that do 1.5 million a month, 2 million a month, like they emphasize this with utmost certainty because they know how important it is. And if it wasn't emphasized, then, it's got to be emphasized for a reason, So that's ultimately one piece of advice that I'd say. And if I could go back, I would have really spent the time building the foundation for that ultimately, lifestyle vision I have for myself, and then work back towards like how that company is the vehicle for me to get there.
Eli, you're an inspiring leader.
Dude, thank you.
Really, I love spending time with you, learning from you.
Likewise.
When it comes to sales, leadership, all that stuff. You're an inspiring being. So thank you very much for everything you're doing. You're leading a great team. I'm looking forward to seeing where you get to in the future.
Thank you for having me. Mr. Rob, thank you. This guy's amazing. You're great. Thanks for having me on, man. Super stoked.
All right, guys. So that's an episode.